welcome to Shalom, Ottawa. My name is Benita Simiatiki, and we have a really interesting show lined up for you today. Our first guest is Rabbi Stephen Garten from Temple Israel, and Rabbi Garten is here to talk about the recently released report by the Pew Research Center on the state of Jewish affairs in the United States, and it could give some clues as to what's in store for us in Canada. So thank you, Rabbi Garten, for coming in.
Thank you for the invitation.
I know that you have done a lot of reading on this report because you've given presentations on it. Can you kind of tell me what you think are the highlights of the report that would be relevant for us?
So I think it's important to put it in the context that this is the third report on the state of North American Jewish life. One in 1990 and one in 2000. Those were called the National Jewish Population Report, and this is done by the Pew Research Institute. Mm-hmm. The highlight is both good news and bad news. The good news is that the Jewish community continues to be stable in its growth and that it hasn't disappeared. In 1990, the report seemed to indicate that birth rate and lack of affiliation it would potentially lead to the disappearance of North American Jews. And everybody beat their breasts about it. But this report indicates that the population is stable and that affiliation rates, while not growing, are relatively stable, and that while there are different definitions for North American Jews today than there were 30 years ago, people continue to identify themselves as Jews. So those are the good news things. The more challenging findings are that where 30 years ago intermarriage was on the rise, marriage between Jews and non-Jews was on the rise, now it is clearly a fixed part of North American Jewish life. That nearly 60% of all Jews marry somebody who is not Jewish. The rates may be a little bit lower in Canada, but not significantly.
Sorry, what percentage again?
60%.
60, wow.
The second thing is, and this is clearly an interesting statistic, and that is the difference between the generation that we might identify as the boomer generation and those who are in their 20s and late 30s, and how those two generations identify themselves. Mm-hmm. Older generations continue to identify themselves as Jews by religious definition, and younger generations choose to identify themselves by lineage, ethnicity, and culture, but reject religious definitions. Mm-hmm. And that's true regardless of affiliation.
Mm-hmm. And do you have an explanation as to why that is?
So I think that the report simply presents the statistics and doesn't try and interpret them. Okay. And anybody can make a hypothesis, but it's clear that in North America, the notion of spirituality has replaced the notion of religious. That religious tends to be a term that is used to define institutional faith, and spirituality is a term that's used to define non-institutional faith. And so while the younger generation talks about being spiritual, they don't talk about being religious. Now, one could then go into a long analysis of what the real difference is, and certainly rabbis want to talk about how Judaism is a spiritual path, but in most cases people see Judaism as an institutional religious expression.
Okay. And the Pew report, from what I read, also gave some consideration to the offspring of the intermarried couples, and what the impact of that is on Judaism. Can you talk about that a little bit?
So as perhaps your audience knows, it's a bit contentious. With so many people intermarrying, the question is, what is the Jewish communal response to that? For a good part of the middle to end of the 20th century, Jews were ashamed if their children married outside the faith. And then somewhere in the mid-1970s, the Reform movement said we should welcome intermarried couples to the community, not necessarily officiate at the weddings, but welcome intermarried. And that was a very contentious issue. And now in the beginnings of the 21st century, the question is, what do you do with the overwhelming number of intermarried couples and their children? And there are a variety of approaches to it. I think the report is clear that the majority of intermarried couples give their children a choice of what kind of religious affiliation they should choose, they should want to live. And of those who give their child a choice, more than 50% do not choose Judaism. However, those intermarried couples who make a commitment to raise their children Jewishly, the report suggests that more than 50% of those children maintain a Jewish identity later in life. So the trick is, do you welcome the intermarried couples in a way that helps them affiliate with Judaism and want to choose for their child a Jewish lifestyle in the hope that the majority of them will remain Jewish? That's a pretty contentious issue.
And I also read in the report that it is that more recently the offspring of intermarried couples, the adult children of those couples, are identifying themselves as Jews in higher numbers than in previous generations. Do you have any theory of why that is?
Yeah, because I think we're more welcoming now than we were at an earlier time when synagogues closed their doors. I mean, it wasn't so long ago that conservative synagogues didn't allow people who were intermarried to be members of their synagogue.
The non-Jewish person had to convert.
In general.
Even convert?
Well, conversion maybe, but only in specific ways. But people who didn't want to convert, even the Jewish partner wasn't allowed to be a member. And so we've really moved in 30 or 40 years to what is the notion of welcoming. And in those places where people have been more welcoming, and that's true in the United States. The United States has definitely been more welcoming than Canada of intermarried families. Those children of intermarried families who've grown up within the Jewish world choose to identify as they grow up and become older Jews. And as both the liberal perspective of Judaism, whether it's denominationally reform or reconstructionist, have invited patrilineality into the world, namely allowing the children of one Jewish parent, regardless of the parents, which one it is, male or female, to have a call upon their Jewish heritage. Those children have responded through Jewish education and Jewish life cycle events to being Jewish in overwhelming numbers. I mean, that's the interesting thing of the report. I think that's what it comes down to. If you bring them into the fold and treat them as if they can be full Jews, they respond to that. If you treat them as if they're not Jewish or half Jewish or in some way questionable, they reject you.
I guess that's not surprising.
Not at all. Right.
And there was a stark contrast then from what you've described to the Orthodox community, where the very Orthodox
Right.
community, where the report says 98% of Orthodox Jews marry within the faith.
Right.
I'm pretty sure I can predict your answer, but that doesn't surprise you, I'm assuming,
No.
given the trend in the
That's right.
rest of Judaism.
So we should be clear that the 98% is referring to closed Orthodox communities, not modern Orthodox communities. It's not speaking about people who practice Orthodox Judaism, but might send their children to a secular university. We're speaking about that small section of Judaism that doesn't interact with the general secular society. And yes, they're very successful if their children marry.
So, Rabbi, given everything that you've talked about and described, how do you see this playing out in terms of affecting the state of synagogues and the more religious institutions that we have come to know, if the younger generation are not, they don't view religion the same way?
Well, it's the preeminent challenge from the report. If the modern generation, the younger generation, doesn't see Judaism as religious, and Jewish institutions, namely the synagogue, keep hoping that they will emulate their parents and grandparents without making changes, then it's like beating your head against the wall. I think you will not attract them. So you have to do more outreach in informal ways. You have to be ready to offer seed grants to non-traditional approaches to Jewish religious life. I think you have to be able to use vocabulary like spirituality in a more open-ended manner. You have to remove concepts like membership and dues, which cause younger generations not to think of religious institutions but secular institutions. And you really have to present yourself as a community of believers, which synagogues can have trouble doing.
Okay, this is a really interesting topic, and probably we could talk for hours about it, and I know you have. Anyways, thank you very much,
My
Rabbi
pleasure.
Garten,
Thank
for
you for the
coming
invitation,
in. And we'll post the website, actually, for the Pew Report on the show, and anyone who wants more information can look at it. Please stay tuned, and we'll be right back. Hi, welcome back to Shalom, Ottawa. Our next guest is Arthur Saper, and Arthur is a member of the Rotary Club of West Ottawa. He's a prominent member of the Jewish community and does a lot of volunteer work, but the other part of his life is that he is with the Rotary Club, and he's the chair of the ABCs of Fraud program. And I've invited Arthur in to to talk to us about warning people about what are some of the scam techniques that are out there, and hopefully if we're aware of them, we can do our best to avoid them. And thanks, Arthur, for coming in.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Can you generalize and say who is the most vulnerable segment that scam artists target?
Principally, the most vulnerable are the seniors. They're the ones that they target for basically 3 reasons. One, they have financial resources. Most of them have saved their entire lives for their retirement. Second of all, they're very trusting. So they're open, if you like. And thirdly, they're available. They're either at home to answer the phone or they're on the internet, so they know how to get in touch with them. They're at the door for people to come to the neighborhood, knock on their doors. So they're generally accessible. So they're the #1 target. Secondly, and increasingly the cohort are younger people because of all the smartphones.
Right. In terms of, like, how would a scam artist target young people with smartphones?
Well, they try and get their credit card numbers. They try and get into their bank accounts.
Oh, okay.
They try and get on their Facebook pages and see who their friends are, and you know, some of the stuff is pretty horrific, and it just goes on from there.
Okay, one of the types of fraud that I know exists is called phishing. Can you explain what that is?
Yes, very briefly, phishing is when you get an email that looks very much like one from a financial institution or from your credit card company, and it alerts you to there's some kind of a problem. There's a problem with the account. Some of the data is, is incomplete, and therefore, if you don't answer this email very quickly, your account is going to be frozen or your access is going to be blocked. So one of the red flags that you watch for in this area, and it goes for all the scams and all the frauds, is when you feel that you've been put under pressure to make a decision. That is a red flag. You should immediately become very suspicious, stop what you're doing, and think about it, take a deep breath, and say, is this something I want to follow through on? So you will typically get an email into your inbox that looks very normal. They will cut and paste a logo from a financial institution, and it'll tell you, as I just described, there's a problem with your account. To make sure that there's no, that it doesn't get blocked, please click on the following link and fill in the information. Now, as soon as you do that, 2 things happen. Even if you get suspicious at that point, they could have put what's called an agent onto your computer, which means as soon as you do go on and do any internet banking, that little agent kind of wakes up and takes down the information that you've now given your financial institution to identify yourself as. So, even if you do nothing and you panic and you stop what you're doing, once you click on that link, you could possibly be in trouble. If they're less sophisticated, they will rely on you to voluntarily give them all the information they need to get into your bank account or to access your credit card. So whenever you see something, normally financial institutions will not send you an email. They'll call you and ask you to come into the branch, or they will send you something in writing to the appropriate address. So be very wary if you get anything on the email that looks at all suspicious from a financial institution or from a credit card company.
Or if you do, I guess you can call the bank first before answering and say, did you send anything?
You can. They will deny it.
They will deny it.
They'll say that we didn't do it.
Okay.
If they haven't heard of it, they'll ask you to forward it to them. They all have phishing accounts, phishing departments. But more than likely, they've already heard about it from tens of thousands of people, because these things are broadcast all over the place. And they'll say, please, well, for sure, let them know that you've been taken. I mean, I should mention this, the best thing you can do to protect yourself, of course, is to tell somebody. So if you did by accident click on one of those links, one of those little blue things, phone your financial institution or your credit card company immediately and say, I think I've made a mistake here, and they will then act appropriately through their security department on your account.
Okay. Another form is the granny scam, which I personally actually know 2 grannies who have been hit by this. Can you describe what that is?
Yes, very briefly what happens is that somebody phones an older person, says that they're...
Is it usually they're calling a woman or not necessarily?
They prefer. It can be a grandfather, but it generally is a grandmother. And the reason is because they feel that they can prey on them emotionally a little bit easier. People don't have the same connections, I regret to say, as a male with their grandfathers as they do with their grandmothers. So what happens is they'll call and they'll say, you know, Granny, I'm in trouble. It can be anything. It can be from a drunk driving charge. I'm in jail. It can be I've been in a bad accident and, you know, I have to hire a lawyer. It can be my car's been stolen. You know, I need some money to rent a car. Some kind of crisis. And what they will do is they'll call the grandmother and ask them to send them some money, either to pay the fine or make bail or to hire a lawyer or to go out and rent a car because their car's been in a bad accident until they can get in touch with the insurance company.
And what about, I mean, does the grandmother not recognize the voice? How do they get past that?
Well, it's very interesting. Usually they're pretty subtle about it. A lot of times they're in a busy room, so they try to simulate like you're in a waiting room of a police station, or you're somewhere where there's lots of people, so that the grandmother's hearing is not exactly, you know, what it was 25 years ago. They can't quite make out the voice, or they'll try and disguise the voice in some other way. But you know, the truth is that the grandmother's not really listening to the voice. She's getting the message that there's a grandchild in trouble. And so that's what she's focusing on. She's not focusing on whether it's really their grandchild. And she's under pressure. And once again, the red flag, if you have to make a decision quickly, she's under pressure, and so she tends to act. And they'll say, you know, Granny, I'm calling you because you and I have been really good together. You know, I know you have my back. You know, I knew I could count on you. You know, I need $2,500 or $3,000 or whatever. Could you please send it to me? Now, red flag number 2 is they'll typically ask you to send it through Western Union or something like that. Once they do that, the money's gone. It can't be traced. It can't be got. You can't retrieve it. And the third thing they'll tell you is don't tell anybody.
Not even the parents of the child.
For sure, don't tell my parents. You know, if my father finds out, you know, or my mother, you know, break her heart, whatever, they're going to give you a story as to keep it a secret. And once they ask you to keep it a secret, that should be the third red flag right away. From a grandparent point of view, something's not right here.
So if I'm at home and I'm a grandmother and I get a call like this, do I just hang up on the person? Like what should the person receiving the call do?
Well, you could hang up. The problem is it could be your grandchild.
Okay.
So there are a couple of things you can do to test it. The first of all is it says, you know, you can say to the grandchild, look at grandsonny, I love you very much. You know how much I'd do anything for you, but this is serious. I have to tell your parents. As soon as the scam artist or the fraudster finds out there's going to be a third person involved, they'll hang up and go somewhere else, because it's not worth it to them to get involved in any kind of delay or any kind of third-party involvement. The second thing you can do is you can say, well, okay, let's say, you know, they've been arrested for DUI, drunk driving or something. You can say, well, tell me where you are. Give me a phone number of the police station you're being held at, or the name of the lawyer the court has appointed, and I'll ask my attorney to get in touch with you. Or get in touch with the lawyer that the court has appointed. Once they hear, again, that there's a third party involved, or that there is time delay, they're going to say, you know, we'll just move on to the next call. I mean, we can find another granny faster than we can sort of trying to reel this fish in, sort of thing. The third thing you can do, because you may not have a lawyer, is you can say, well, this is going to take, you know, a bit of time. There's a bit of money involved, so I'm going to have to consult with, you know, the bank manager. It'll take me a day or two to raise the money. Once again, any kind of time delay whatsoever, they know this is not going to work, so they go on. So if any of those sort of tests, if you like, fail, and they say, well, never mind, click, you haven't, you know, have the guilt of maybe perhaps hung up on your grandchild.
So in one of the cases that I know of, it just happened recently, the person on the phone actually got the apartment number of the grandmother and went right to her apartment door, and she handed him the money.
Oh, yes.
Is there a danger in that? Then now he knows where she lives?
No, because that's not the kind of crime it is. It's not a crime of violence. But that's another way that it's not traceable. That's another one of the red flags. If they say, we're going to send over a courier to pick up the money right away, well, or, you know, 3 o'clock this afternoon to give the grandmother enough time to get to the bank and empty her bank machine, they'll send somebody to the door and say, I'm from ABC Courier or XYZ. She hands them the envelope, it's gone. They're not interested in robbing the grandmother with violence. I mean, it's really not that kind of crime. It's very much a crime of I'd say white collar, if you like.
And are these are local people, obviously.
Can be anywhere. The internet is everywhere. Telephones are everywhere. You know, it can be a phantom phone.
Right.
You know, one of those disposable phones.
And we're heading into winter, and a lot of people are going to be heading south over the winter for a few weeks to a few months, and there's a lot of scams that involve travelers.
Yes.
Can you describe what those are?
One of the more sophisticated ones that's shown up just recently, you know, I'm smiling because it's actually quite clever. What will happen is that around, let's say you're traveling and you stop for the evening, around 4:30, 5 o'clock, just when you're getting a bit of a rest, they will call your room and say there's been a problem with your credit card. We put through the card for your incidentals when you checked in, didn't go through, but don't worry, we can handle this for you. If you just give me your credit card number, I'll put it through again and everything will be fine when you check out in the morning. By the time you go to check out in the morning, you're going to find out that that credit card has been duplicated and all kinds of things have been put on it. And
so the smart thing to do is go down yourself to the front desk and check it out.
The smart thing to do is go down to the desk. Smart thing to do is don't answer your door if you're not expecting anybody. If somebody calls you from outside, tell them you'd like to speak to somebody at the front desk, or could you put them in touch with the manager, because they can't do that. Right? This is usually an outside call. So once again, any type of resistance or any kind of delay, they will move on because it doesn't pay for them to fool around anymore.
And very quickly, if there's a #1 credit card fraud protection tip, what would it be?
Protect your PIN number. Watch your PIN number at all times. Do not give out your PIN number under any circumstances, and certainly don't give out the security code on the back, the 3-digit security code on the back, unless you've initiated the transaction yourself and you know where that information is going.
Okay. Arthur, it's been really interesting, and you've provided a lot of helpful tips for
Thank you.
For our
Can I just
community.
give the phone number?
Sure. Well, we will put it on the screen.
Okay.
How is that?
Put it on the screen.
We will put it on the screen. Thank you very, very much for coming in, and thanks for watching Shalom, Ottawa. Have a good Hanukkah, and we will see you back in January. I'm Benita Simiotiki, and goodbye.
Na 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 na. Na 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 na. הדבורים עקצו אותי וחרק מקיף אותי כשיצאתי לטייל ועכשיו אני בטל. נמלים זוחלות עליי, ברבורים שוחים איתי, דברו איתי מחר, דברו איתי. אריה צוחק עליי ואני שואג נו די, לחבב את הכלבלב, אני די מבסוט עליו, לא מוצא סיבה טובה.